My sister raised her glass, her voice dripping with cruelty as she declared to the entire room, "This is my sister Clara, the failure who never achieved anything worth mentioning." Laughter rippled through the wedding hall, burning into my skin like acid. My parents smiled proudly beside her, as if humiliating me was part of the celebration. They had already sold my apartment behind my back to pay for this $100,000 wedding, and now they wanted my dignity too. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled, a smile that promised their downfall was already in motion. When the laughter faded and the champagne flutes clinked, I felt the sting of my sister's words linger. But the truth is, humiliation wasn't new to me. My life had been one long rehearsal for that very moment. Ever since I was 12 and my father's sudden death ripped our family apart, I had been cast into a role I never auditioned for. The caretaker, the provider, the one who carried burdens meant for adults while I was still a child. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night, staring at my mother's red-rimmed eyes. Sophia was only 7 then, too young to grasp the weight of what had just happened. My mother placed her hand over mine and whispered, "You're the strong one now, Clara. You'll take care of us, won't you?" It wasn't a request. It was a life sentence. I gave up college dreams before they could even bloom. I had been accepted into a program I loved, but tuition money was redirected to Sophia's private school fees. "She's got potential," my mother insisted. "Don't you want her to have the opportunities you never will?" And so I nodded, silently folding away acceptance letters and scholarships, pretending I didn't feel my heart crack. While other girls my age went to parties or dated freely, I worked double shifts at a local diner and later at an accounting firm, dragging myself home, exhausted but proud that I had kept the lights on, that Sophia never had to worry. I covered her extracurricular activities, her designer dresses, her trips abroad. I didn't just play the part of sister, I became her shadow, making sure her path was smooth while mine was paved with sacrifice. Years passed, and people whispered that Sophia was destined for greatness. She was beautiful, ambitious, magnetic. Everyone adored her, while I was the reliable one in the background, forgotten until a bill needed paying or a problem needed fixing. My mother beamed at Sophia as if she were the sun itself, while I remained the quiet gravity keeping our world from spinning apart. The irony was that despite all the giving, the only real thing I owned in this world was a modest apartment. I had scrimped and saved every spare dollar, taking extra shifts no one else wanted, skipping meals so Ella, my daughter, would never go hungry. That apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. It was our sanctuary, our safety net. In a life where everything else belonged to someone else, that space was the one thing I could point to and say, "This is mine." And then came Sophia's engagement. She strutted into my apartment one evening, flashing a diamond the size of my thumbnail. "James Carter," she announced, her eyes gleaming. "His family owns half the city." She twirled around the living room as if she had already moved out of our world and into theirs. Mother clapped like a schoolgirl, tears streaming down her face. "My Sophia," she whispered, "you're finally where you belong." I offered a smile, though it felt heavy on my lips. I congratulated her, hugged her, even though a quiet ache spread through my chest, because in that moment I realized I was invisible to them. My sacrifices were footnotes, her triumphs were headlines. As weeks passed, preparations for the wedding consumed the household. Sophia demanded luxury, crystal chandeliers, imported roses, a designer gown that cost more than my yearly salary. Mother supported every whim, as if the wedding was their golden ticket into high society. My protests about the cost were met with sharp reminders. "This is her once-in-a-lifetime moment, Clara. Don't ruin it with your negativity." Sophia's arrogance grew with every fitting and rehearsal. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand. "You know, Clara," she said casually, "maybe you should skip the wedding photos. James's family doesn't need to see, well, you." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I bit my tongue, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. She smirked and added, "You're just too ordinary. Standing next to me would be embarrassing. That night, after Ella had gone to bed, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the walls of the apartment I had fought to keep. Ordinary. That's what I was to them. Ordinary, disposable, useful only when they needed something. Then, one evening, as I stepped quietly into the hallway, I overheard voices behind my mother's closed door. Sophia's sharp tone cut through the air. "We need more money. The Carter family expects perfection. Clara's apartment could sell for at least $90,000. My heart froze. Mother's response was calm, almost eager. "She'll never resist if we frame it as a family necessity. She owes us everything." There was silence, then Sophia's laughter. "She doesn't have to know until it's done. Imagine her face when we thank her for the wedding present." I pressed my back against the wall, my pulse hammering in my ears. My sanctuary, the only thing I had built for myself and Ella. They were plotting to take even that. I wanted to burst into the room, to scream, to demand they stop. But I didn't. Instead, I slipped quietly back into my apartment, holding Ella close as she slept. And as I stroked her hair, a calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless, because they thought I was weak. They thought I would let them take everything. They were wrong. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick and expensive, its edges pressed with gold leaf. I knew before I even opened it what it would be: the official wedding invitation. I traced the embossed letters with my fingers, trying to ignore the knot forming in my chest. But when I unfolded the card, my eyes landed on the carefully printed names and then the empty line where my daughter's should have been. Ella's name had been struck out. I blinked once, twice, willing myself to be wrong. But there it was in cold ink: Clara Mitchell, 1 seat reserved. My 6-year-old daughter erased from her own family's celebration. I carried the invitation to the kitchen where my mother was sipping tea. "Her name isn't here," I said quietly, holding up the card. Mother barely looked up. "The wedding is elegant, Clara. Children don't belong at such events." "But she's family," I whispered, my voice cracking. "She's your granddaughter, my only child." Sophia entered then, her perfume sweeping into the room before she did. She plucked the card from my hand and smirked. "Honestly, Clara, it's better this way. Ella would only distract. This isn't a backyard barbecue. It's a Carter wedding." I stared at them both, searching for some flicker of compassion, but their faces were stone. Sophia rolled her eyes and added, "You should be grateful you're even on the guest list. Just your presence is already generous of us." That night, as I tucked Ella into bed, she noticed the invitation lying on the nightstand. She climbed into my lap, her little fingers tracing the golden border. "Mommy?" she asked softly. "Why can't I come?" Her eyes were wide, innocent, full of hope I couldn't bear to crush. My throat tightened, but no words came. I kissed her forehead instead, whispering, "Because sometimes people forget what matters." She didn't understand, but she nodded, hugging me tightly before drifting to sleep. I sat there long after she closed her eyes, my heart heavy. For years I had endured their cruelty in silence. But when their cruelty touched my daughter, it ignited something different inside me, a fire I hadn't felt before. The wedding day came faster than I expected. The Carter estate shimmered like a palace, draped in roses and chandeliers that sparkled under the midday sun. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits streamed through the gates, their laughter echoing against marble walls. I walked in alone, my modest dress pale against the flood of silk and sequins. Eyes followed me, assessing, judging. I heard the whispers like tiny knives against my skin. "She's the sister?" one woman hissed behind a fan. "She looks more like the hired help," another chuckled. My stomach twisted, but I kept walking. A server led me to my seat, and my breath caught. The chair reserved for me was tucked at the very edge of the reception hall, directly beside the restroom doors. Guests brushed past me, some not even noticing me at all. From across the hall, Sophia glided in wearing her custom gown, radiant beneath the chandelier lights. She basked in the attention, the admiration, every eye fixed on her as though she were royalty. I felt invisible, a shadow in the corner of her stage. Dinner passed in a blur. Plates of lobster and champagne flowed to the glittering tables, while I sat ignored, my water glass never refilled. I wanted to vanish, to take Ella and run far from this charade. But then the music softened and Sophia rose, glass in hand, stepping to the microphone. The crowd hushed, eager for her words. She smiled sweetly at James, then turned toward me. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice honeyed with malice, "I want to introduce my sister, Clara, the one who always tried but could never quite keep up." A ripple of laughter spread across the room. My mother clapped politely, lips curved in pride. Sophia tilted her head, feigning pity. "She's been useful in her own way, always the dependable one. But let's be honest, every family has their failure." The word failure echoed in my chest like a gunshot. My cheeks burned, but not from shame, from fury. Around me, whispers rose, eyes darted, some curious, some mocking. The humiliation was absolute, carefully orchestrated for maximum spectacle. I stood frozen, but then something shifted. Instead of tears, a smile tugged at my lips. Not the brittle smile of defeat, but something colder, sharper. The cameraman swung his lens toward me, capturing the moment. And there I was, standing at the edge of a glittering world, humiliated, discarded, yet smiling. The guests exchanged glances, confused. Why was I smiling? What did I know that they didn't? I let them wonder, because they would learn soon enough. The laughter still hung in the air when I finally pushed my chair back, the scraping sound drowned out by music and chatter. I couldn't breathe beneath the weight of so many eyes, each one either mocking or pitying. My hands trembled as I clutched my purse. Enough, I thought. Ella needed me, and I didn't need to endure another second of this spectacle. I rose, ready to slip out unnoticed, but the moment I turned toward the door, a voice carried across the hall, calm yet commanding. "She's with me." The room froze. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, champagne flutes suspended in mid-air. I turned, heart hammering, and saw him. Nathan Hale. Tall, composed, immaculately dressed in a black tailored suit, he strode into the room as if the world itself parted for him. His presence was magnetic, pulling every gaze toward him. The musicians faltered, then fell silent, their bows hanging over strings. Even Sophia's triumphant smirk wavered. Nathan crossed the distance with measured steps, his eyes never leaving mine. And before I could react, he reached for my hand, lacing his fingers with mine as though it were the most natural thing in the world. He lifted our joined hands slightly, presenting me to the room. "She's with me," he repeated, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs swelled. I felt Sophia's glare burning into me from across the hall, her knuckles white around her champagne glass. My mother blinked rapidly, struggling to process what was happening. James Carter's father, Richard Carter, rose stiffly from his table. "Mr. Hale?" he greeted cautiously, his tone laced with strained politeness. "We weren't expecting you tonight." Nathan's lips curved into a cool smile. "I wasn't planning on attending, but then I heard how this family treats those who deserve better." His eyes flicked to me before returning to Richard. I couldn't stay away. The hall erupted in whispers. Guests craned their necks, eager to catch every word. Someone whispered, "That's Nathan Hale, the investor, the man who owns half the downtown properties." Another hissed, "If he's here with her, what does that mean for the Carters?" Sophia's mask cracked for a fraction of a second, panic flashing across her perfect features. She quickly plastered on a brittle smile. "Clara," she said loudly, "you didn't tell us you had company." I said nothing. Nathan squeezed my hand gently, a silent reassurance. His presence was enough. Richard cleared his throat, his voice tight. "Of course, Mr. Hale, your friend is welcome here. Please, sit." But Nathan shook his head. "I won't be staying long. I simply came to clarify one thing." He turned, sweeping his gaze across the glittering room. As of this evening, I control the primary investment portfolio tied to Carter Enterprises. Which means, he paused, letting the silence stretch, the tension coil tighter. How you treat those close to me will directly reflect how I treat you. A stunned hush fell over the crowd. Then, like a switch flipped, the air changed. Guests who had mocked me moments before now leaned forward with obsequious smiles, glasses lifted in my direction. Compliments tumbled over one another. What a beautiful dress! So glad you're here tonight. The same mouths that had laughed at my humiliation now scrambled to erase their cruelty. Sophia's face drained of color. Her confident posture wilted as she looked desperately to James, who shifted uncomfortably under the weight of Nathan's declaration. My mother's jaw hung open, her teacup composure shattered. And me? I stood taller, not because of the borrowed power Nathan wielded, but because in their frantic about-face, I finally saw the truth. Their approval had always been worthless. Nathan bent his head toward me, his voice low enough for only me to hear. You don't have to endure this, Clara. Not anymore. I met his gaze, and for the first time that night, I felt something break loose inside me. Not pain, not humiliation, but freedom. I nodded. We walked together toward the doors. Every head turned, every whisper followed. The chandeliers glittered above, but the brightest light was the silence that fell as my heels clicked against the marble floor. When we reached the exit, I glanced back one final time. Sophia stood frozen, her smile twisted, her eyes wide with the horror of losing control. My mother clutched the back of a chair as if the world itself had tilted beneath her feet. And then I stepped out into the night, my hand still in Nathan's, my heart pounding with something dangerously close to hope. But as the door closed behind us, Nathan's gaze lingered on me, deeper than the polite mask he showed the room. There was something there, something unspoken, heavy with history. It wasn't just business for him. And I knew then that this night was only the beginning. The night air was cool against my skin as Nathan led me down the marble steps of the Carter estate. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the weight of his hand around mine, steady, grounding, yet heavy with something unsaid. Finally, I broke the silence. Why are you here, Nathan? My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the unease of a past I had long buried. He stopped under the glow of a street lamp, turning to face me. His eyes, darker now than I remembered, softened as they met mine. Because I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy you again. The word again caught me off guard. Memories I had tried to bury came rushing back. The library study sessions, late-night coffee runs, the stolen kisses under campus arches. Nathan and I had been inseparable once, bound not only by affection but by shared dreams. He had wanted to build something that mattered. I had wanted to stand beside him, finally free to chase my own ambitions. But then my father died, and my mother's words shackled me. You're the strong one now. Sophia needs you more than ever. The night I broke up with Nathan still burned in my mind. I told him I couldn't leave my family, that my duty outweighed my heart. He begged me to reconsider, but I walked away, trading love for obligation. Now, years later, here he was, standing in front of me as though no time had passed. I tried to move on, Nathan admitted, his voice low, but I never forgot you, Clara. I followed your life from afar, and when I heard whispers about what they'd done, what they were planning to do, I couldn't stay silent. I swallowed hard. What did you hear? That they sold your apartment, he said simply. The words sliced through me like a blade, though I already knew the truth. It wasn't just mine, I whispered. It was the only place Ella and I had, the only thing I'd built for us. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to continue. Do you know how many years I spent making sure that home stayed in our name? I was the one paying the mortgage, Nathan. Not my mother, not Sophia, me. Every late shift, every dollar scraped together. It went to that roof over their heads, and they never knew. They thought it just paid itself. Nathan's expression hardened, fury flashing in his eyes. So they've been living under your sacrifice all this time, and now they've sold it for her wedding. I nodded, bitterness rising in my chest. They've taken everything, but they don't realize what's coming next. The next morning, the wedding celebration carried on as though nothing had happened. Guests flooded the hall with chatter and laughter, though an uneasy undercurrent lingered from Nathan's dramatic arrival. Sophia tried to mask her nerves with smiles, her laughter sharp, brittle. My mother clung to her side, whispering reassurances neither of them truly believed. I slipped into the back unnoticed, not to celebrate, but to witness, and then it happened. The doors swung open, and a man in a postal uniform entered, carrying a thick envelope stamped with official seals. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd as he crossed the polished floor and stopped at my mother's table. "Delivery for Mrs. Mitchell," he said flatly. She frowned, snatching the envelope. Sophia leaned over eagerly, curious. But as my mother tore it open and her eyes scanned the contents, the color drained from her face. She gasped, her hands trembling as the paper slipped from her grasp. The letter landed on the table, bold black letters staring up at them all. Notice of foreclosure. Gasps filled the room. Chairs scraped against marble as whispers exploded like wildfire. Foreclosure! What does that mean? Whose house? Sophia's hand shot out, snatching the letter. Her eyes darted across the words, disbelief hardening into panic. "No!" she breathed, shaking her head violently. "No, this isn't possible!" The laughter that had filled the hall earlier died instantly. The grand chandeliers still sparkled, but beneath them, silence reigned. Guests stared, some in shock, others in morbid fascination, savoring the downfall they sensed unfolding. I stepped forward, not to announce, not to gloat, but simply to watch. My mother's eyes lifted, wide and desperate, searching the room until they found me. She fumbled for her phone, dialing with shaking hands. Moments later, my own phone vibrated in my purse. The screen lit up. Mom. I let it ring once, twice, before pressing decline. The sound of the call ending was sharper than any applause I had ever received. A hush settled as I turned toward the exit. My heels clicked softly against the floor, each step deliberate. No one tried to stop me. No one dared. At the doorway, I paused, glancing back only once. Sophia stood pale and trembling, clutching the letter as though she could will it to disappear. My mother sagged in her chair, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes glistening with the first taste of fear. And then, under the weight of their stunned silence, I whispered, just loud enough for myself, "This is only the beginning." The fallout began faster than even I had imagined. By the next morning, whispers of the foreclosure notice had already made their way into the Carter family's inner circles. Wealthy families thrive on reputation, and once the stench of scandal touched Sophia's name, it spread like smoke in the wind. At a tense brunch the following day, James Carter's father made his position clear. "This marriage was supposed to strengthen our family name," Richard Carter said coldly, his voice carrying through the gilded dining room. "Instead, it has made us the subject of ridicule. We cannot align ourselves with instability." James tried to protest, but Richard's glare silenced him. Sophia sat pale and trembling, her manicured hands twisting in her lap. When Richard left, his words still hanging like a guillotine in the air, James turned on her. "You lied to me," he spat. "You said your family had money. You said you weren't a burden. Now look at us, mocked, pitied." Sophia's voice cracked. "I didn't know Clara would—" "Clara?" James laughed bitterly. "Don't blame her. You brought this on yourself with your arrogance." Their honeymoon, meant to be a lavish escape to the Amalfi Coast, was canceled before their bags were even packed. Arguments replaced romance. Within a week, their fairy tale engagement had unraveled into bitter resentment, the cracks widening into an irreparable chasm. Meanwhile, my mother's world collapsed in tandem. She had quietly taken loans against the promise of Sophia's golden future, certain that her marriage into wealth would erase every debt. But with the Carter family cutting ties, those debts came crashing down. Collectors called daily, their voices sharp and unforgiving, Her small business, already fragile, folded under the pressure. The woman who had once spoken with such pride now hid behind closed curtains, answering the phone only to plead for extensions she would never receive. And yet, as I watched from a distance, there was no joy in it. One evening, I entered Ella's room to find her sleeping soundly, her tiny body curled around her stuffed rabbit. I sat on the edge of her bed, the glow from her nightlight soft against her peaceful face. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. I had chosen this path. I had exposed the truth. And though part of me felt vindicated, another part ached. For all their cruelty, they were still my family. The weight of that paradox pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I brushed a strand of hair from Ella's forehead and whispered, "I hope one day you understand why I did this." But outside the quiet of Ella's room, the storm raged on. Relatives who had once ignored me began to speak differently. Aunts and uncles called, some apologetic, some indignant on my behalf. "You were the only one who ever sacrificed for this family," one aunt said softly. "We see that now." Their words were a balm I hadn't expected, though I accepted them cautiously. Recognition could never erase years of dismissal. Sophia, however, found herself increasingly isolated. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with scandal. Invitations dried up. Whispers followed her in grocery stores and salons. At last, desperation drove her to me. She appeared at my apartment one rainy afternoon, her once perfect hair plastered to her face, her eyes red and swollen. She stood at my doorway, clutching herself as though the cold rain might consume her. "Clara," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I studied her, the sister I had raised, the one for whom I had sacrificed so much. For a flicker of a moment, I saw the child she once was, crying in the night after our father died. My heart wavered, but then I remembered her laughter at the wedding, her words slicing me open in front of hundreds. "I can't help you," I said softly. "Not this time." Sophia collapsed into sobs, but before I could close the door, another figure emerged from the shadows. My mother. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, not softened by guilt, but sharpened by desperation. "Clara," she said quickly, ignoring Sophia's tears. "You can fix this. You've always been the strong one. If you'd just step in, help us settle these debts, maybe things can be saved." My stomach turned. Even now, after everything, she wasn't here to apologize. She wasn't here to mend the rift. She was here to use me again. "Don't you see?" I whispered, my voice trembling with anger and grief. "You never loved me for me. You only loved what I could give you." Her face hardened, the truth hitting like a slap. For a heartbeat, the hallway was silent except for Sophia's muffled sobs. I shut the door. Behind it, my mother's voice rose, insistent, relentless, a vulture circling what she still believed was hers to claim. Inside, Ella stirred in her sleep, and I pressed my back against the door, tears falling freely. The family I had carried for so long had finally revealed itself for what it was, a bottomless pit of need, greed, and ingratitude. And though it broke me, I knew I could not go back. For days after I closed the door on my mother and Sophia, the silence inside my apartment was deafening. But it was not the suffocating silence of defeat. It was the cleansing kind, the kind that comes when the storm has finally passed and the air tastes different. For the first time in years, I was no longer tethered to their endless demands. The weight I had carried on my shoulders since childhood was gone. I woke early one morning to the soft sunlight spilling across Ella's bed. She stirred, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and then smiled at me with that unguarded joy only a child can offer. "Mommy, can we go to the park today?" she asked. "Yes," I said instantly, surprising even myself. How many times had I said no before? No, because I had to work. No, because I had to cover another bill. No, because family obligations always came first. But now it was just us. The realization settled over me like a gentle blanket. I could finally choose. Nathan became a steady presence in our lives, not as a savior swooping in to rescue us, but as a partner who respected the boundaries I carefully laid down. He encouraged me to take a leap I'd been too afraid to consider, opening my own small accounting firm. With his guidance, I found office space, hired 2 assistants, and slowly began building something of my own. For once, my hard work was for Ella and me, not for a family that only saw me as a resource to exploit. At night, after Ella was asleep, Nathan and I would sit together, sharing quiet conversations. Sometimes we spoke of the past, of what might have been if I had chosen differently. There was sadness in those talks, but also healing. We didn't erase the years between us, but we built something new atop them. As weeks turned into months, the ripples of consequence spread further across the family I had left behind. Sophia's world crumbled in slow motion. The Carter family formally severed ties, releasing a statement that framed her as deceitful and manipulative. Invitations to social events vanished. Friends she once boasted about stopped returning her calls. When she walked down the street, whispers followed her like shadows. For a woman who thrived on admiration, the suffocating absence of it was unbearable. My mother fared no better. Her debts swallowed what little she had left. Without Sophia's glittering future to cling to, she found herself alone in the house I had once paid for, curtains drawn, phone silent. Neighbors who had once envied her daughter's prospects now avoided her. She was no longer the proud matriarch of a thriving family. She was a lonely woman staring at the ruins of her own making. I heard through distant relatives that she occasionally spoke of me, but never with remorse. Always with longing, as if she still believed I might return to shoulder her burdens once more. But I did not. I had drawn the line, and crossing back was no longer possible. One evening, after a long day at my new office, I found Ella asleep on the couch, her drawings scattered around her. She had sketched us, me, her, and even Nathan, standing beneath a bright sun. Above our heads, in her shaky 6-year-old handwriting, she had scrawled, "Family." I sank to my knees beside her, tears filling my eyes. It wasn't the family I had been born into, the one that had drained me dry with their greed and cruelty. It was the family I had chosen, the one I had built from love and resilience. And for the first time, I realized I no longer hated my mother or Sophia. I didn't forgive them, but the anger that once consumed me had burned itself out. What remained was clarity. They had taken so much from me, but in the end, I had gained something they could never steal: freedom. Justice had been served not in courtrooms or with vengeance shouted from rooftops, but in the quiet unraveling of their own arrogance. Sophia, once adored, now lived in exile from the very circles she had fought to impress. My mother, once certain she could manipulate me forever, now sat alone with nothing but her memories. Their punishment was not my hand, but their own choices catching up to them. I stood at the window that night, looking out over the city lights. Nathan came up behind me, resting a hand gently on my shoulder. "You've come a long way, Clara," he murmured. I nodded, watching the lights flicker in the distance. I finally learned that letting go doesn't mean losing. Sometimes it's the only way to win. My reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, not the overlooked sister, not the dutiful daughter, but someone whole, someone who had endured betrayal, humiliation, and loss, yet emerged stronger. And as I tucked Ella into bed later that night, brushing a kiss across her forehead, I whispered the words that had guided me through it all. Letting go is sometimes the most subtle revenge.